Excellencies, distinguished delegates, participants, dear colleagues, very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Dominique Burgeon, and I am the director of the FAO Liaison Office in Geneva, and I will be moderating this session today. First of all, I would like to really thank you for taking the time to attend our session today, given the busy agenda of Geneva in the midst of the preparation for the 14th Ministerial Conference of the WTO, which is, as you know, known as MC14. Which is scheduled to take place from 26 March to 29 March in Yaoundé, Cameroon. In this regard, we appreciate your support and interest in FAO's work. As you may already know, as FAO in Geneva, we aim to facilitate FAO works on trade and agri-food systems with partners in Geneva in a multidisciplinary and collaborative approach. The series of trade dialogues we organize in collaboration with our Markets and Trade Division in Rome, as also with our Fisheries and Aquaculture Division in Rome also, represent a key component of our effort to this end. Through these dialogues, we share information on relevant and timely topics in the area of trade, agriculture, fisheries, food security, and agri-food systems transformation. And we promote FAO's analytical work in support of the formulation of trade policies that are conducive to improved food security. In December last year, FAO published 7 trade policy briefs. Entitled Trade Policy Briefs, FAO Support to the WTO Negotiations at the 14th Ministerial Conference. These policy briefs cover a range of topics associated with agricultural and fisheries markets and trade. With MC14 now only 1 month away, today's information session will provide an opportunity to present the trade policy brief and also to inform about the technical support available from FAO, including in terms of data, tools, and analysis in line with FAO's mandate. Before we start our session today, I would like to share some details regarding the logistic and housekeeping of this session. This session will be held entirely virtually. It will be in English, only with no interpretation. The session will be recorded, and the recording will then be shared with the participants along with the relevant information sources. It will be done right after the session. We have reserved some time for questions toward the end, so please, we would like to ask you to use the Q&A module to that end. Kindly state your name and organization, and we'll try to accommodate as many requests as possible, either in writing or orally during the session. So that's it for housekeeping. And let me now introduce our speaker. And I must say we have a very impressive lineup today with a number of colleagues joining from FAO headquarters in Rome. First, we have Mr. Boubacar Ben Belhassen, who is the director of the FAO Market and Trade Division. We have also Mr. Marcio Castro de Souza, Senior Fishery Officer at FAO Fisheries and Aquaculture Division. And then we have also 6 more colleagues from the Market and Trade Division: Salamat Ali, Senior Economist, Abdi Ali, Emiliano Magrini, and Miss Edona Dervisholi, and Miss Irina Kobuta, who are all economists in the Trade and Market Division. And we have Mr. Cosimo Avesani, who is a trade policy analyst within the same division. So that's it for my introduction. And now I would like to give the floor to Boubacar, who will set the scene and provide a brief introduction of the work done by his division, the Market and Trade Division. Boubacar, over to you.
Thank you, Dominique. Greetings from Rome. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, dear colleagues and friends. It's a great pleasure for me to welcome you to today's event introducing FAO's new set of trade policy briefs. This, in fact, marks the 4th collection published since 2017, prepared with the aim to assist members in the run-up to the 14th WTO Ministerial Conference, or as Dominique mentioned, MC14. International trade plays a vital role in advancing global food security. It connects surplus and deficit countries and regions, sustains economies and the livelihoods of populations, and fosters the transformations towards more efficient, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable agri-food systems. While FAO is not a negotiation forum on trade rules, however, as the United Nations Specialized Agency in Food and Agriculture, it provides technical support to inform trade negotiations. In a rapidly evolving global context marked by heightened uncertainty, increasing environmental pressure, and shifting policy landscapes, robust evidence and well-informed policy dialogue on trade issues have become more important than ever. In FAO, our trade-related work in support of our members is structured around three complementary streams. One, evidence building. We provide market intelligence and independent, objective analysis to inform trade and market-related policy decisions. Two, capacity development. We support national capacity development efforts for the design and implementation of both trade policies and agreements. And three, inclusive policy dialogue. FAO offers a neutral platform where stakeholders can engage on important and emerging trade issues, share experience, and foster mutual understanding. The 7 trade policy briefs that we are presenting today form part of this commitment. They are not intended as academic exercises, but rather as a practical tools that offer concise, accessible policy insights tailored to policymakers. As you will see, they cover a broad range of issues, including development in fisheries and aquaculture markets, environment-related provisions in regional trade agreements, RTAs, policy approaches to strengthening women's participation in agri-food trade, FAO support to members in implementing the WTO agreement on fisheries subsidies, the effects of shipping costs on food import bills, the linkages between trade and nutrition, and last, on the medium-term projections from the OECD FAO agricultural report. All the 7 briefs draw on FAO's extensive analytical work on agriculture markets, trade, fisheries and aquaculture, and food security. They distill evidence into practical policy insights and consideration to support informed engagement and constructive dialogue. Rather than advocating for specific outcomes, the briefs aim to help members navigate complex policy options and choices through sound analysis and evidence. Looking ahead, FAO, we are committed to continue working closely with the WTO and other partners in line with our respective mandates to ensure that trade advances global food security, improves nutrition, and supports sustainable agri-food systems. I also wish to thank you, to join my colleague Dominique, to thank you again for taking the time in a very busy calendar to attend the event today. I hope you find the policy briefs and the discussion informative and useful. With this, Dominique, I will conclude with my opening remarks and back to you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Boubacar, indeed, for setting the scene, reminding us of FAO trade work, the pillars of FAO trade work, as well as for introducing the topic of today, the dialogue on the policy briefs. So let's start with the brief themselves, with the 2 policy briefs on fisheries, which are entitled Trade in Fisheries and Aquaculture Products, Global Market Production and Food Security, for the first one. And the second one, the WTO Agreement on Fisheries Subsidies, FAO support to members in its implementation. And for that, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Marcio, who is indeed Senior Fishery Officer at the FAO Fisheries and Aquaculture Division. Marcio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dominique. Greetings to all participants. First of all, it's a great pleasure for us from the Fisheries Division to be here supporting trade and supporting WTO and the office in Geneva. As Dominique mentioned, we do have 2 policy briefs addressing fisheries. They are somehow interconnected. And the first one, I'm going to share my screen. And the first one is the one that deals with trying to show the importance of fisheries in terms of international trade. So the first brief is basically to show in terms of what fisheries and aquaculture trade and production stands today, in terms of its scale, in terms of the structural shifts that we have faced, its role in food security, and also nutrition, and complexity, the growing complexity of the rules governing trade, in particular in fisheries and aquaculture. So the idea, as mentioned by Dominique and Boubacar, the idea of the both policy briefs in fisheries is to give the negotiators a clear, evidence-grounded picture of what is going on with the sector and what FAO can support negotiators, in particularly in connection with the fisheries and aquaculture division. And also, particularly in the area of fish trade, the issue is also to highlight the importance of fish trade, a sector that usually does not have enough focus in terms of its importance in international trade when you talk about the value traded of this sector. So one of the main messages, some of the main messages of this policy brief, the first one, is exactly to show that fisheries and aquaculture products are one of the main factors in terms of foreign exchange gains for many countries. And when you look at the global trade of fisheries and aquaculture sector, we are talking about a group of products that internationally trade more than beef, pork, and poultry combined in terms of value. So it's a quite significant sector. In addition to that, it's a sector that has continually growing in the last years, but with a considerable shift in the breakdown of the production in the sector. We have traditionally, the sector is divided into production coming from wild capture fisheries and aquaculture production, the farming of fish. And in the last year, farming is becoming each year more important in terms of the global production of fisheries and aquaculture product, but also in terms of the trade is becoming also more important, considerably important. So we have some species that are very associated with farming, like shrimp, like salmonids, like tilapia, which we all know that are produced in some specific countries and are traded all over the world. But in addition to that, it's important that although aquaculture is becoming quite important in the last year, capture fisheries remain an important supply area of the sector, a supply subsector of fisheries and aquaculture. When you think about tuna, when you think about whitefish, when you think about small pelagics. So it's quite a significant, this shift that we are facing in terms of production. In addition to that, it's quite important that fisheries and aquaculture sector has with two dimensions, developing country dimensions and also the human dimension. So we see that there is a lot of supply of fisheries and aquaculture products coming from developing countries, going to developed countries. That's quite important that. In addition to that, we do have a strong gender inclusion in the fisheries and aquaculture product, and also the issue of a high level of integration in terms of labor participation in the sector. Also, in the last years, the sector has faced a significant change in terms of more elements, in terms of framing sustainability being market requirements or being preferential requirements for market access. We have seen the proliferation of SPS measures. We have been the proliferation of trade agreements incorporating non-tariff measures, and also many other elements that bring sustainability in this niche. So I think one issue that's quite important to highlight, particularly in fisheries, is the importance of small-scale fisheries. So all this scenario, small-scale fisheries has a huge presence, including for international trade. Of course, we do have challenges in terms of the integration of small-scale fisheries, but at the same time, we do, as FAO, provide a lot of information, of dissemination of information that tries to reduce this information gap, including information on those non-traditional clauses of trade agreements, include information on the issue of sanitary and phytosanitary problems that the fisheries and aquaculture faces. So the idea is that we are going to, we provide elements that can be used. But in addition to that, we do have a series of analytical tools and instruments, in addition to an FAO agreement that provides the basic benchmark to allow sustainability. And that gives me the room to go to the second brief, which is exactly on the WTO agreement on fisheries subsidies. The agreement on fisheries subsidies is basically to, we all know the objectives of the agreement. I'm not going to reiterate that. But one important aspect that I want to highlight here is that FAO already has a suite of instruments and agreements that can facilitate countries in order to comply and to comply with the agreement, and of course, to implement its rules. That's a quite critical element. We do have specific instruments dealing with illegal fishing, dealing with stock assessment, dealing with many other elements, including data reporting, notification, etc., that are critical for the implementation of the agreement. In this sense, I just would like to highlight that the combination of instruments that we have, the importance of fisheries and aquaculture sector in international terms, provide FAO as a natural element, a natural supporter for countries in order to better implement sustainable practices that are going to be key for the adoption and implementation of the agreement. I think that's my message, Dominique. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Marcio, and thank you so much also for being so punctual in your 8 allocated minutes. So thank you for these two briefs. Significance of the sector and its evolution. We shift towards aquaculture, but with capture fisheries remaining big. The importance of the small-scale fisheries also when it comes to trade. And then, of course, second one, the role FAO can play in support of its member for the implementation of the fisheries subsidies agreement. Thank you very much for that, Marcio. Let me now move to the second part, and I would like to give the floor to Abdi concerning the policy brief on medium-term prospects for global agricultural commodity market based on the joint FAO-OECD report. Abdi, welcome, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Dominic. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever you are in the world. Let me briefly walk you through some key insights from the 2025 OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook, which this policy brief is based on. The OECD FAO Agricultural Outlook sets out a consensus baseline between the two organizations and some of their member countries for where the global agriculture is heading over the next 10 years. To start with a big picture, since 2015, that's 10 years ago, global consumption of agricultural products, whether it's food, feed, fuel, or fiber, has increased by 18%. And the report projects that by 2034, it will be a further 14% higher than what it is today. What is especially important is where this growth is happening. Almost 80% of the additional consumption will originate from middle-income countries, and a large share of that will be in livestock products. Now, this has several important implications for trade and policy. One, growing demand means greater reliance on trade. Countries will either need to scale up production or import more, whether it's the final food product or the feed for livestock sectors. And because of this, the volume of agricultural commodities traded is set to expand, with agricultural trade accounting for around 22% of all calories consumed worldwide. Now, this really underscores the importance of a strong multilateral cooperation and rules-based trading system to keep food flowing from regions with surplus, as Bubakar said, to those facing deficits, especially during times of crisis. Now, the second implication is meeting this additional or extra demand comes with environmental pressures. More production, and especially a structural shift towards greater animal production, means that more cropland, larger animal herds, and ultimately higher direct agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, which the report projects that it will increase by 6%. Now, this highlights the need for policies that support sustainable resource use, climate adaptation, and resilience. And trade can play a really, really important role here by allowing production to take place where resources can be used more efficiently. Finally, and the third implication is smallholders continue to face serious market access issues, which hold them back from capitalizing on this growing demand. Now, in many low-income countries, smallholder farmers struggle with limited access to markets, they struggle with infrastructure, they struggle with technology, and without targeted support, they would not be able to benefit from the growth the report is projecting. What would be important here is investing in rural roads, storage, digital tools, and policies that expand market access, not only to global markets, but also to local markets will be very, very critical and will allow them to take advantage from this growing demand and market opportunities. Now, in short, the picture brings some opportunities and challenges, and countries need to work together to make sure that trade continues to support both food security, sustainability, as I mentioned in my second implication, and inclusive growth for everyone. Thank you. I give the floor back to Dominic.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Abdi, for briefing us on the FAO OECD outlook, essentially, looking at the situation, the outlook, and as well as offering solution in terms of policy opportunities. I would say thank you very much. And now let's move forward, and our next speaker will be Emiliano, who will talk about the policy brief on the dynamic impact of global shipping costs on the food import bill. Emiliano, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you, Dominic, and ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to everybody. So I will briefly discuss with you today a part of an FAO stream of research on the effect of disruption to maritime transportation on food and agricultural trade, and in particular, I will mention something about the impact of shocks to shipping costs on the global food import bill. So let's start with just some facts and figures that links maritime transportation to food and agricultural trade. As we know, maritime transport is critical for global food security because almost 90% of the entire food and agricultural trade happens through maritime and ships and vessels. We also know that food is among the sectors that faces the highest transport cost relatively to the value of the goods. And we also know that the shipping disruption have an impact on the freight rates, so how much countries pay to import their goods, on insurance and fuel cost, as well as on delivery times. What are more or less the consequences of this disruption? They can be easily anticipated. We have impact on food prices, domestic food prices, and import food prices. These can lead to higher inflation at country level, as well as imbalances in terms of balance of payment, and also, as you can imagine, we have impact on foreign reserves. And one consideration we must have is that, of course, low-income countries and food import-dependent countries are those most exposed. And another important consideration is that what happened in the last years, and we have observed, this series of shocks that strain maritime transportation. We have seen both the COVID-19 pandemic and the recovery after the pandemic. The war in Ukraine, the Red Sea attacks on commercial vessels, as well as the drought in the Panama Canal. All these series of shocks basically had the consequences, especially between 2020 and 2022, to increase very sharply the freight rates of both container and dry bulk. Now, what are the results of our analysis? Just to get straight to the point, we observed, and our analysis showed that the impact of these shocks are strong and rapid. So simply a 10% increase in shipping cost has the consequence to increase by 1.2% if you look at the bulk transportation, or 3.4% if you look at container transportation, the global food import bill. And also the other aspect to be taken into consideration is that the effects materialize quite quickly. So over 70% of this impact materialize in 6 months and peak after 1 year after the shock. Next slide. Now, just to look a bit closer, what are the consequences and the challenges for net food import in developing countries? What we observe also is that usually this subset of countries face above average impacts. And in particular, 10% increase in container freight result in almost 4.5% increase in their food import bill. Just to give you a numerical example, if there is a 10% increase in the freight rates, you will see in few months that the food import bill of Sub-Saharan Africa will increase by $2 billion. This means also that for this group of country, transmission is faster. So almost half of the impact is just in 3 months, and it's more persistent. And it means that it takes more time to be reabsorbed the shock. There are very many different possible explanations. I will not get into all of them, but for sure, the most important ones are there is a limited competition and shipping routes for these countries. The volumes that reach this group of countries sometimes is small, and there is the possibility of generated economies of scale, and the delivery times for some regions are very long. Now, I will jump directly to the policy implication. What can be done? What governments can do? There are, first of all, some short-term mitigation measures to be put in place, which means targeted measure to protect food affordability at country level. And the second one also, if we look at from more a macroeconomic perspective, some instrument must be identified to cope with both foreign reserve shortages and current account imbalances. Finally, more in the medium to long term, of course, the objective must be reducing trade and transaction cost, prioritizing the integration on the net food import developing country into regional global networks, and lastly, invest in targeted improvements in port operation, logistic services, and multimodal transport corridors, which doesn't mean that every country must build its own port or must build its own infrastructure, which is very expensive, but integrated with others and sharing the cost. So the final message is more resilient shipping networks are essential for more resilient agri-food system. Back to you, Dominic.
Thank you so much, Emiliano, for this brief on the dynamic impact of global shipping costs on the food import bill, presenting very well the current situation, its impact, and again, offering, I would say, policy options for people to consider. Thank you very much. And now let me move to Cosimo on the policy brief on environment-related provisions in regional trade agreements and their impact on environmental outcomes. Please, Cosimo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Dominique, and good afternoon to all. It is a pleasure to present this policy brief, which basically lays on the key results of a forthcoming FAO study that looks into how environmental-related provisions linked to the agriculture, fisheries, and forestry sectors, what we call AgERPs, are shaping the domestic environmental governance across a diverse set of countries. In 2024, FAO published two analytical studies that aimed at quantifying the number of ERPs in RTAs as well as their environmental impact. What emerged was kind of significant. On the one end, the total number of ERPs in RTAs between 1995 and 2022 increased from only 30 to almost 6,000. And on the other hand, when measured, we realized that ERPs have a very strong impact in mitigating the environmental effects of production growth induced by trade. Yet, we had to understand how this was happening, and we decided to look into what kind of change this kind of provision induced in the signatory countries. So, to address that question, our study employs a three-step documentation analysis across 4 carefully selected case studies countries, which were chosen to reflect diverse ecological, economic, and regulatory contexts. For each country, the analysis traces ERP-related legal and policy changes across agriculture, fisheries, and forestry, and assesses the causal relationship between trade commitments and domestic regulatory trajectories. And what emerged is a kind of nuanced but pretty consistent picture. For instance, in Costa Rica, different trade commitments under agreements like the one with the US or the EU really reinforced and accelerated the pesticide regulation in the country. In Kenya, the EAC Treaty or the UK-Kenya RTA really supported landmark legislative reforms, specifically in the fishery sectors. In Malaysia, ERPs, which are embedded in agreements like the TPP, really catalyzed a significant legislative action to combat IUU fishing and to strengthen timber traceability. In other countries, we have South Africa as another example, where robust domestic environmental frameworks preceded many trade commitments. ERPs under the SADC agreement, EU SADC agreement, or UK SACOM really serve primarily as reinforcing mechanisms, kind of consolidating existing national priorities rather than generating entirely new regulatory directions. So the findings point to a kind of mutually reinforcing relationship between the RTAs and the domestic policies. So AgERPs can serve as external drivers of reform, and at the same time, countries with strong environmental priorities can shape the design and ambition of ERPs during the negotiations. So this bidirectional dynamic suggests that RTAs are not just legal instruments. They really are a part of an ongoing dialogue between international obligations and domestic governance. But of course, problems exist, even if ERPs and RTAs, let's say, continue to expand in number, scope, and they've been somehow implemented. Such implementation is often constrained by fragmented responsibilities across ministries or limited resources. And of course, the growing spaghetti ball effect of trade agreements also presents an additional challenge. So the policy recommendation of this brief are pretty clear. We suggest to strengthen the monitoring system of ERPs in the agreements, to enhance policy coherence between trade and environmental objectives, and to invest in targeted capacity development. Of course, to learn more about this topic beyond these 3 minutes, please follow us on our channels, follow our Geneva office, and when published, you'll be able to access the study. and as well another study we were preparing in the same domain. Thank you very much for the attention. I hope you're enjoying this webinar, and Dominique, the floor is back to you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Cosimo, for this briefing on the impact of ERPs on environmental outcome. Again, coming with a number of very concrete policy recommendations. To be complete, I should say that this work has benefited from a support from the Swiss government. So we are very grateful to them, a work that has been taking place for the last 3 years and that will continue moving forward, including in relation to the next policy brief that will be presented by Edona. We'll be speaking about the relationship between trade policy and nutrition outcome. And this is now benefiting from the Swiss government support. So Edona, over to you.
Thank you, Dominique, and good afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to present this brief, which is based on the 2024 edition of FAO's flagship report, The State of Agricultural Commodity Markets, Trade and Nutrition Policy Coherence for Healthy Diets. The report provides the analytical foundation for the key messages I will share today. As some of my colleagues have already mentioned, trade is essential to the function of an agri-food system as it moves food from surplus to deficit regions, helping to stabilize supply and improve access to safe, diverse, and sufficient food, especially given the wide differences in natural resources and climate conditions across countries. Trade, therefore, helps countries use resources more efficiently while expanding consumer choice. One of the clearest links between trade and nutrition is food diversity. Because countries differ in their production capacities, trade plays a crucial role in expanding what is available for consumption. In 2020, countries produce on average about 120 food items domestically, but when trade is included, the number of food items available for consumption rose to 2025, nearly doubling dietary diversity. This illustrates how trade expands food availability beyond domestic production alone. At the global level, food production is sufficient to supply most nutrients. However, in 120 countries out of 177 analyzed, domestic production alone does not meet national nutrient requirements. Micronutrient deficiencies, including vitamin A, calcium, and zinc, remain widespread. Evidence shows a positive association between trade openness and nutrient adequacy. Countries more integrated into global markets generally achieve better nutrient supply outcomes. At the same time, trade increases access not only to nutritious food, but also to energy-dense products and high in fats, sugar, and salt. As a result, its nutrient impacts are not uniform. In some contexts, particularly in high import-dependent countries, trade may contribute to rising overweight and obesity. Food prices are another key channel. Imports can lower prices and improve affordability and dietary diversity. However, lower prices may also reduce incomes for producers who face stronger competition. Trade openness tends to lower prices for both healthy and less healthy foods, and consumer responses vary across income levels. To ensure that trade supports improved nutrition outcomes, several policy actions emerge. Trade can be leveraged to improve nutrition by increasing the availability, diversity, and affordability of healthy foods alongside clear food labeling that enables informed consumer choices. Achieving this requires strong coherence between trade and nutrition policies through cross-sector alignment and targeted capacity building for policymakers. It also calls for broader stakeholder engagement and greater transparency in trade negotiations to ensure that trade advances food security, nutrition, and inclusive economic growth. With that, I thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you very much indeed, Edona, for this brief on the relationship between trade policy and nutrition outcome, also referring to the latest indeed SOCO report and our work that continues in the area. And now I will move to our last speaker before we open the floor. And it will be Irina, who will present the trade policy brief on advancing women's participation in agri-food trade. Irina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dominique, and good afternoon, participants and colleagues. Why is one of the policy briefs devoted to this particular topic? First of all, because advancing women's participation in agri-food trade plays important role in fostering economic growth, reducing hunger, and making agri-food system more sustainable and resilient. And secondly, as you may know, this year, 2026 year, is the International Year of Women Farmer, and FAO, in collaboration with other UN Rome-based agencies, facilitates its observance and implementation. So we continue raising awareness on this important topic. And the policy brief prepared by us highlights the main structural barriers women face in markets and trade, and some key actions needed to support an inclusive market-led transformation of the agri-food sector. The expansion of agri-food trade creates new opportunities for rural development, employment, and poverty reduction. But in many countries, structural inequalities still shape who is able to participate and who benefit from this growth. Globally, women tend to engage less than men in the marketing of agricultural products that are traded across borders, particularly high-value goods. In particular, small and medium enterprises where women are represented often struggle to comply with increasingly strict trade regulations. And meeting the market access requirements requires resources, technical knowledge, then women-led businesses often lack. And they tend to have less capital, networks, and access to market information. More broadly, women face persistent structural barriers that limit their access to markets and trade opportunities. In many contexts, women still face restrictions, for example, on property ownership, on land rights, which reduce their ability to provide collateral, access credit, and invest. Women also face unequal access to education, finance, technology, and trade information, and remain underrepresented in leadership and decision-making across agricultural value chains. Also, some social norms can also limit women's mobility and time. And these inequalities are not only unfair, they are also economically costly. FAO estimates that closing such gaps in productivity and wages in agri-food systems could raise global GDP by about 1% and reduce hunger by around 2 percentage points, potentially lifting 45 million people out of food insecurity. So, and the governments and institutions can implement several actions to address the barriers women face across agri-food market and value chain, ensuring equal opportunities in agri-food trade. Women need to support to increase their capacity to meet international trade regulations and standards and access to resources, finance, and market informations. It's very important to improve women financial inclusion, which remains one of the largest gaps. And targeted measures include, for example, financial schemes, incentives, and financial products designed for women entrepreneurs. So many countries has already introduced collateral-free loans and dedicated funds to support women-led SMEs. So at the same time, capacity development, business development services, and digital education can strengthen women's knowledge and trade regulations, custom procedure, and export requirements. Second, governments can improve transparency and accessibility of trade processes by simplifying custom procedures, improving border infrastructure, and promoting digital solutions. These measures reduce delays and costs for all participants, of course, but especially they help women-led SMEs participate more safely and effectively in formal trade. Expanding women access to digital tools can also reduce exposure to abusive practices and harassment, especially at border crossings. So finally, it's important to strengthen the ability and quality of trade and gender data and analysis in the agricultural sector to inform, guide, and monitor evidence-based policies. To conclude, agri-food trade can be transformative for women, but achieving this requires reforms to remove structural barriers backed by coordinated action, legal frameworks, institutional accountability. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Irina, for this brief, which is on advancing women participation in agri-food trade, and which is, as a matter of fact, very timely in the context of the International Year of Women Farmer, which we are commemorating this year. So now we move to the second part of this dialogue, which is the opportunity for you participants to engage with our speakers today, most of them, all of them, as a matter of fact, authors of the briefs that were presented to you. So it's an opportunity to engage with them. So I would like to invite you to ask questions, ideally in the Q&A, but you can also, I believe, no, you cannot raise your hand, so please use the Q&A module. I see that there has already been some questions that have been answered in the Q&A module, and I have received also some here that I will ask, starting with Marcio. And this relates, Marcio, to the policy brief on WTO agreement on fisheries subsidies and the role of FAO. And in your brief, you mentioned that FAO has a long-established set of normative instruments which might enable, as a matter of fact, direct assistance to countries. Could you please perhaps elaborate a bit, especially for those countries that are at the early stage of implementation, how they could indeed best benefit from FAO support and access those already existing instruments? Over to you, Marcio.
Thanks, Dominique, and thanks for the question. And indeed, we all know how challenging it's going to be for some countries and some topics associated with the agreement in terms of implementing policy and legal alignment in terms of the country, that increasing and strengthen data and scientific capabilities, and also reorganizing the institutional arrangements, infrastructure, and particularly one issue that was already mentioned in terms of the problem of communication between countries. So as I mentioned briefly in my initial presentation, we definitely can support countries in terms of stock assessment analysis, in terms of data collection, and also legal framework. And how we can do that? The first step, as you mentioned, for countries that are in the initial stages of the implementation, are still assessing what they need to do, is the contact with our national offices in the country. So that's the starting point for countries, for governments, in order to contact FAO at the national level so that the problem can be discussed and the needs can be discussed. And then we from here, from headquarters, we can support countries in order to either direct make an intervention in the country to support on specific areas, or also to assist the country in terms of other sources that the country can use to finance its needs. For example, the WTO Fish Fund, if it's a developing country in the case. So this is more or less the broad picture of how FAO can support countries in this regard. Thanks, Dominique.
Well, thank you. Indeed, very important to do this, bearing in mind that at the end of the day, we are there to support our members in the best possible way. So now a question to Cosimo on the ERPs in RTAs. Well, how do you move from categorizing provisions in a database to actually assessing whether those provisions are actually being implemented at domestic level?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Dominique. So the methodology that we use is based on the experience of George and Yamaguchi, who published a paper back in 2018. So really the idea is to look at both the direct and indirect impacts of ERPs, let's say, including the policy shifts that occur after, but also in the context of the RTA's negotiation. Obviously, apart from some specific cases, let's say that the strict causal attribution is not so straightforward to establish. But let's say what we did in practice, so to assess the ERP's effect on domestic legislation, we use, as I said before, a three-step document analysis. So first, we collected all the national legal and policy texts from different official repositories in the 4 countries. So as I said before, it's Costa Rica, Kenya, Malaysia, and South Africa, trying to cover agriculture, fisheries, and forestry. Then we traced the legal and institutional changes over time, trying to focusing on the, on the regulatory reforms, for instance. And then we have to map these changes against the RTA's timelines, and of course the content of the ERPs to try to identify a possible influence. This kind of approach basically allowed us to explore both causality, but as well the policy alignment, trying to capturing more nuanced pictures of how the international and the domestic frameworks interact to each other. It wasn't the simplest exercise ever, in the sense that we really had to go through the legislation of all these countries and as well check them really against their RTAs. But again, the results is what I was mentioning before, and you will be able to see the full papers and read the full methodology as soon as the papers will be published, I hope in a couple of months' time. Thank you for the question.
Okay, thank you very much, Cosimo, and please keep us posted on that. We will make sure that it reaches out to our audience here in Geneva. And now let's move to perhaps the last question I have, as I don't see other in the, there is actually one that just appeared, but I will ask a question that is pending, and then perhaps we'll move to the last one. So it's a question to Irina on the policy brief in advancing women's participation. Could you please provide us some example of existing policy approaches at country level to indeed ensure women participation in trade and agriculture?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for this question. Yeah, in the last few years, several countries have increased their support to facilitate women participation in international trade in agriculture. And one of trend is the move towards sector-based strategies to help women move into higher value segment of agri-food value chains. So, for example, some countries have incorporated targeted measures into their national trade strategies, agricultural transformation plans, financial inclusion programs, and support to SMEs. And the objective is to ensure equal opportunities for women and men along the value chains and strengthen women's role and contribution not only as producers, but also as entrepreneurs and exporters. Then access to finance and markets remain important issues for women. And also there are practical response in place. For example, some governments are using tools such as credit guarantees, lending schemes, rural women funds, and public procurement quotas. And all these instruments support investments, productivity, and business growth. Support is also being directed towards women smallholders and cross-border traders through training, innovation support, improvement in trade facilitation and safety along trade corridors. Of course, it's due to support provided by many international agencies and program, for example, Aid for Trade programs, and also by FAO. So, for example, FAO jointly with the International Trade Center implemented a few years ago the joint program, which is called Empowering Women and Boosting Livelihood Through Agricultural Trade, EBAT. And it was implemented in 6 countries in sub-Saharan Africa. And about 700 women entrepreneurs and traders were training on trade facilitation, business readiness, and access to finance. I hope you answer on your question.
No, thank you very much, Irina. Well, thank you. It has been a very rich session with excellent presentations, and I would like to thank our speakers for that. There's been a rich dialogue also. We have received a few more questions. Unfortunately, we have no time because we are reaching the end of the session today to take them, but don't worry, rest assured, we'll go back to you. We have taken notes of the questions that are there, and we'll get back to you providing some elements of response. Before we close, I would like to give the floor to Salamat for some concluding remarks. And then I'll say 2-3 things at the end. Salamat, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dominic, and sincere thanks to all our presenters for their concise and insightful overviews. Excellencies and colleagues, as we bring this session to close, I would like to highlight 3 key takeaways. First, today's discussion clearly demonstrates how interconnected today's trade challenges have become. From fisheries and aquaculture to shipping cost, nutrition, environmental governance, and women's participation in trade, these policy briefs remind us that trade policy does not operate in isolation. It sits at the center of agri-food systems, shaping food security, livelihood, sustainability outcomes, and resilience to shocks. So these linkages are not abstract, they reflect realities faced daily by producers, consumers, and policymakers. Secondly, in this challenging global context, this kind of dialogue, which are based on evidence, are becoming more and more important. As we see volatile freight cost, climate-related supply chain disruptions, market concentration, and diverging regulatory frameworks are adding many layers of uncertainty to global agri-food trade. In this environment, objective analysis, timely and credible data, and practical policy insights become very essential. FAO's trade policy briefs are designed precisely for this purpose, to provide members with accessible and timely input and to inform constructive engagement as we move to MC14. Colleagues, third and most important, a common thread across all these 7 policy briefs is the need for enhanced multilateral cooperation for coherent and inclusive policy approaches. Whether we are discussing fishery subsidies, medium-term agriculture outlook, trade nutrition linkages, or women's participation in trade, the central message is very consistent, that trade policies work best when they're aligned with broader development objectives, grounded in evidence, and attentive to vulnerable groups and countries. So please, looking ahead toward MC14, FAO stands committed to supporting members through data, analytical tools, and technical assistance. So beyond these policy briefs, we are ready to engage the delegates on country-specific questions, deeper technical discussion, and capacity building needs. With these brief reflections, I will stop here. Thank you very much, and back to Dominic.
Thank you very much, Salamat. So let me now quickly wrap up the session today. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, participants, dear colleagues. First of all, we would like here in the FAO Liaison Office in Geneva to express our sincere gratitude to our colleagues from Rome, from the Trade and Market Division, as well as from the Fisheries Division. I would like to thank the participants, of course, for participating. And before closing the session, I would like to take this opportunity to announce some upcoming events. First of all, there will be the new editions of two FAO flagship reports that will come out this year. There will be the 2026 edition of the State of World Fisheries and Aquaculture, known as SOFIA, that will be released in mid-June. And the theme of this edition will be Blue Transformation, Turning Vision into Impact. And then there will be the 2026 edition of the State of Agricultural Commodity Market, known as SOCO, which will be released in early July. The theme of this edition will be Trade, Resilience, and Food Security, Global Food Market Under Stress. Two very important key flagship reports. While we will be starting our FAO in Geneva Agricultural Trade Talks and FAO in Geneva Fisheries Trade Talks for 2026 following MC14, I would like to mention that we will have an immersive and photo and video exhibition that will be held at the Palais des Nations in the Salle des Pas Perdus on the occasion of the observation of the International Year of Women Farmer during the week of 16 October. Please come and visit, and this directly relates to the brief of Irina. I would like also to inform you that the trade policy brief presented today will be soon published in all six FAO official languages, and we will be sharing them with you. I would like to thank you once again for participating, and thank you for your patience with my coughing. I have recovered from that, and I wish you a good rest of the day. Thank you very much, and bye-bye.